Welcome, everybody, to the new episode of Life That Said Yes Conversations. And this time, I have the honor to be joined by Lisa Clark. Welcome, Lisa. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Where are you located at the moment?
I live in North Carolina in the southeastern United States.
And how is the weather now there? What is the nature telling us?
Oh, it's early fall here. It's just starting. So the nights have become cool and the days have finally cooled off. We have a very hot summers here. So this is a lovely moment when the humidity lifts and we enter into this very beautiful time of year.
Yeah, for myself, it's maybe the favorite part of the year, this gentle transition of late summer into autumn.
Yeah, I love this transition too. It's one of my favorites, that transition from, that kind of heaviness of summer, and then we go into this fall, and then it goes into the leaves coming down, and then the light changes, and the trees change, and then we move into winter. I think it's very dramatic,
Yeah.
I live on a farm, and my home sits in acres and acres of meadows. So I'm very struck by this, it's like living in a sea of grass and trees, and I just love the changes that happen. The birds change, the insects change, the light patterns change, and I feel like I live in the middle of it and can participate, really fully in it.
Right. And for me, it's also a constant reminder how we are also a part of this nature,
Mm.
which in a way it's always changing.
Yeah, that's true. It's always changing. It's such a model of that, I think. We can feel that in our own bodies. We do these beautiful practices called body mind centering
Right.
or yoga, and what happens in the studio on the mat when we lay on the earth, between our body and gravity and space. But then you enter outside. I enter my meadow, and then I see I'm not the only one responding to that. Like everything's responding to the pull of gravity and space and cycles and interconnectivity. It's not just within me or not just between people. Like we live in this really vast construct or a universe that has all those principles, right? It's lovely to be swimming in it.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be experiencing it through our senses. And I kind of noticed that doing all this beautiful somatic work made my senses kind of more tuned in to all this beauty around and the changes, because
Yes.
we can kind of go through it and not notice it. For me, the reward is the senses becoming more open and just noticing things that are everyday but kind of special in their beauty.
Mhm. Yeah, body mind centering is a training of the senses,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, yeah,
It really deepens our capability,
yeah.
you know. Mm. Mhm.
So I read in one of your interviews that before you started this journey of movement and exploration of movement, that you were an artist.
Yes, yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about that, and what does being an artist mean to you, and how did you make this transition of being an artist to becoming a movement artist?
Mm. Let's see. Art was my earliest training, and the way I was trained in art can be considered now at this point in time very old-fashioned. It was a long training where you had to use your senses to see. And whatever you saw and experienced, then you had to translate that into your capability to draw or paint or sculpt.
Mm.
So you're actually capturing a moment or a sensation or something, an object, a tree. And then how do you relate that onto paper through line and color and form?
Mhm.
So it's many, many years of training the eye and my senses and perceptions to see and then transfer that into a medium.
Mm.
Now, my art teachers wouldn't have said, I'm training your senses and perceptions, but that's pretty much what they're doing. So, and you're trained to spend long amounts of time witnessing,
Mhm.
seeing, witnessing, being present, responding to what you see. Are these words familiar? Bonnie has sense, feel, action,
Mhm.
respond, right?
Mhm.
So I think artists are trained in this way. At least I was. So it wasn't such a big jump to go from that training, spending long times by myself in a studio, right? Because
Mhm.
I was taught to make work and then you take the work to the gallery or the museum, or then you are able to talk about what you're experiencing. And I did that for several decades. So when I first met Bonnie Cohen, the workshop I went to was on the endocrine system. So here was this woman who I thought was the most creative human I had ever met. Like what came out of her mouth, how she saw things, her vocabulary. I thought, oh my gosh, who is this person? I mean, I had only been studying body mind centering in a weekly class for about a year and a half. And this was a 2-day workshop in Washington, D.C. And I was just staggered by
Mhm.
meeting her. And I decided to pursue it because I didn't think she was talking about movement. To me, she was explaining the phenomena of witnessing, seeing, sensing, being, responding. And I felt like, well, this is what I do, but she's constructing it so different. So
Mhm.
this was the original moth to the flame. I was really drawn to find out more. Let me also say, within context, at that time, the art world was exploding. It was moving into on-site performance work. It just was changing the whole. And my interests were changing. Like I was changing mediums a lot. I was moving to film and video and performance work, improvisation. So I was changing at the same time and not just making objects anymore, but into these specific moments in time, something happens and then it dissolves.
Mhm.
And so that's a big change artistically. And then I met Bonnie at this perfect moment and just sailed forward. And then movement began to become much more my medium, and
Mhm.
sound became my medium, and video, film, photography
Mhm.
became my mediums because they were more immediate.
Mhm.
You see,
Right,
they're
right,
capturing capsulated moments.
right.
So it always went together.
And during that first initial workshop on the endocrine system, for me, exploring the endocrine system was also a breakthrough point because here I really found what I was looking for and some things that I experienced through other contexts, like the shamanic search. And I was looking for that, how to experience it in my own body, you know. And then when I was exploring the endocrine system, it was like this magical system for me, very much, which kind of connects Earth with the higher realms. So my question during that initial workshop, was there any particular moment that struck you in your own experience, like, wow, this is opening something new for me and I need to pursue it?
I love your description of the studying the endocrine and the glands. I mean, this was the same for me. It
Yeah.
was a door that just sort of doors blew open inside of me, I would say. It was this direct experience of consciousness,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
And that's what I loved about art making. Art making, I had felt an affinity from such a young child with art that I could stand in front of a piece of art and it could move me so
Mhm.
deeply into other realms, other thoughts, just transport me. And then now I'm studying the glands and it's doing the same thing. But
Mhm.
let's add another piece of this is that I had been studying yoga for many, many years at that point.
Mhm.
So, I've been a student of Vedic philosophy for almost 40 years.
Mhm.
And practicing yoga even longer. So, in that workshop, I thought, how is she doing this? Like in yoga, in the philosophy, it's sort of like one-liners. You read Patanjali and it's the sutras, the threads. They're
Right.
threads that link together, that carry and change our consciousness. But Bonnie didn't use all those words, but she was directly taking us to those places that were described
Right.
as attainable, but she was taking us directly there through the glandular system.
Yeah.
So that that was deeply moving. And again, my curiosity, how is she doing this? Right? How does
Yeah.
she do this? And for decades, the glands were my favorite system.
Mhm.
Like for a very long time, I loved teaching them and yeah, the glands.
Yeah, I love this. How everything was being taught to you through experience, and these yoga sutras, which are like very veiled and vague, in some moments they suddenly became clear, huh? Through the experience of the glands. And this was back in the 80s or 70s.
It was back in the early 80s. So this workshop was in 1984.
Yeah. So would you say that that was still like a formative period where this knowledge was being created on the spot?
Bonnie's work, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, very much so. I
Mhm.
think it was. Um, that was a time in Bonnie's work where there was a very large transition. Okay.
Mhm.
She had been doing her workshops and we'll put in quotations, trainings, a long series. She had been doing them in New York. Then she was doing them in Amherst, but she hadn't done the first big formal practitioner training. That didn't come till 1986.
Mhm.
So she was teaching a lot of, she did the muscles and she did the skeletal system. And I believe she was teaching developmental movement, but it was different than it is now. Okay. That was really evolved. So Indrican, um, she had done some mini workshops on it, but I think this was like, wow, she was really forming it.
Yeah.
I mean, there were no notebooks, there was nothing written. It really was. Bonnie walked into the room and said something like, I'm interested in, or I've been exploring, And then she would just launch into it, and we wouldn't come up for air until she kind of finished. And that period of time could be an hour, or at those days, it was several hours. And then she'd say, let's take a break. And then we'd come back into it in the afternoon.
Mm.
So I'm going to say it was the early days of Indrakan. And even in 1986, when we did the summer programs in Amherst, again, she did the glands. And well, it had a profound effect on a group of 100 people. And yeah. And then I think after that, she contained it more. It was still experimental. Now,
Yeah.
this is my point of view, of course. She might tell you something different, but it was wide open, is what I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
It's much, I mean, I just recently taught Indrakan in Taiwan, and it's much more contained, much more contained.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I have a feeling in those experimental days, whichever knowledge is being explored, it's a little bit, I would say, more strong or maybe chaotic until it becomes contained and refined and until it goes through several generations. It's kind of like the pioneers are really venturing into the unknown.
It's a very good, nice way of summing up what happened, I think, in the 80s with the Indrakan material. It
Yeah.
was chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, can imagine we were in a room at the first BMC training in 1986. We were in a room with over 100 people. So you can imagine the intensity of that material going from body to body in that room.
Mm-hmm.
It was a good word, chaotic.
Everybody survived.
We survived, and it was wonderful. Really, it was transformative, actually.
I can imagine.
Mhm.
Yeah, what I'm interested here is about this transmission of knowledge. Can you talk a little bit about this, about transmitting the knowledge, or should we say, from your words, it was an invitation for a co creation? And to what part does this concept of the mind of the room plays the importance, and to what part the actual language and formulating the language of the material?
Well, to this day, when I'm in the room with Bonnie, or even when I'm listening to her, on a live stream, I'm deeply affected by what she says.
Mhm.
And so the language is an embodied language
Mhm.
of the direct material. So the words and vocabulary that we have built over a long time are the map to get us there.
Mhm.
But sometimes it's not even how she says it, it's the resonance that she's embodying of the material that takes you directly there. So it's a direct body to body transmission, if we use that word.
Mhm.
So it creates, I've assisted her and taught with her and been a student, for a very long time. So I've watched her over the years come into a room so unassuming and just stand there and be her. And somehow that sets a ripple through the room. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't say, look at me, or be quiet now. She just stands there. And she's able to create a mind in the room where something actually goes through the room that affects all of us.
Mm.
Okay. I know you've experienced this with her. And then through what she says and how she embodies it, she can move an entire room into that experience, which we've come to call the mind of the room. As I watched her do this, eventually I just asked her, what are you doing? Like, I have not seen anybody do this. Like, what are you doing? Can you teach it to me? How are you doing it? What are you doing? Can you identify it? And can you teach it to me? Like, I want to be able to do that too, you know? And what she would say is, she said, well, I just be the material, and whoever can see it, they're just going to come along with me. And it doesn't matter to me that if nobody else in the room gets it, I'm going to keep talking to the person who gets it in the room. And this is how it moves through the room. She says, I'm just become it.
Yeah, like authentic transmission through the mind of the room.
And she holds that space.
Right.
She holds it so that in our chaotic individual selves, it might take us a while to arrive there. But the beauty of her and all great teachers is they just hold the space open for us to arrive there eventually. And she does it again and again and again.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So in the end, we always go back to this resonance, to this vibration in a way.
Yes, yes. And those are interesting words, aren't they? Resonance, vibration.
Yeah.
They're words that we've heard in yoga, right? And Bonnie used to not use words like that. Now she does. She uses these words. So the word resonance and vibration began to come in when I think she came into the embryology work and started, working with the embryology work as well as the pre-vertebrate patterns, right? And then she began to identify there's a moment when we're pure resonance or vibration, be pre-form, and then we come into form. So we're energy, we're a presence of vibrational wavelength that is pre-form, and then we come into a form, and the form is us building ourselves into this layering of embryology, layering of movement connectivity. Like the movement creates the form, and vibration is a movement, right? We agree. It is a wave form, whether it's in form or not.
Right.
So let's go back to language and mind of the room. Over the years, when I teach the body systems, I always say to my students, okay, let's pretend it's skeleton I'm teaching. The mind of skeleton, what is it? Can we start to make a list? Or the mind of organ, or the mind of endocrine? What is it? Does it have a time frame? What are the words we use? What do we feel when we're in those systems, right? And you begin to realize that every body system has a time. It's not linear time.
Right.
Some of them are circular, some are chaotic, some of them have a fast wavelength, some have a slow wavelength. It's like music, right? So every system has that. And that's when you teach a system, if you know its resonance, if you know its mind, that's the way you speak, how you time your words, how you phrase your words, what words you use. And this is one of the things that can bring people into the experience directly. So resonance, how do we describe resonance? If as a yoga student, vibration and resonance, the words were used, but it sounded magical, didn't it? But it's not so magical. It's like mathematical. It's waveform, and how form comes into reality, right? It's physics. It's many, many things can explain that experience in body mind centering.
Right.
But what is I continue to love about body mind centering, it's one of the few forms that I feel can directly bring us there. As I study other modalities, movement modalities, all absolutely wonderful. But BMC has this way of working directly on the cellular level with us to change us.
Hmm.
That I don't find in other forms, bodies of work.
Yeah, and what's beautiful is that change, it comes from us directly. In a way, it's like a reclaiming process, discovering something that has always been with us in a way, but maybe we haven't put it into awareness. So I feel all these layers of support that we are carrying on the inside from every system, and every system has its own consciousness and mind and time, and but in a way they are all supporting us. So for me it was always this feeling of discovering all these wonders inside me, but this realization, oh my god, I am that. I have always been that. I always had that inside me. I was always this vibration and pulsation, and this is the moment that it's truly empowering.
Yes. I've always been in the cosmic dance.
Yeah.
I've always been part of the cosmic dance. And anytime that ignorance is pulled from me, like the ignorance that I wasn't,
Mhm.
well, it's profound. It's profound. And
Yeah.
body mind centering continues to do that for me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, definitely.
It's very, sometimes, I feel like body mind centering is a very tantric form.
Yes.
Yeah, he's very much like it. I look at Bonnie and sometimes I've joked with her. I said, like, you're just like some old reincarnated yogi, aren't you? Like, I mean, really, come on. The things that you say, the things that how you perceive life.
I always say that BMC has this veiled spirituality inside because it's never addressed directly, and we are focusing very precisely on concrete elements of our physical body, but the actual experience takes us a step further. I feel if we have the sensibility for that, you know, and it really has this deep significance, but it's not talked about directly. It's not put in the front. It's kind of like there for you to find it if you venture deep enough into yourself, journeying deeper into self. Like you said, this cosmic dance. Like we are, in a way,
Mhm.
then come to the realization that we are everything.
Yes. Yes. Like everything that you're saying, I do find that having been with Bonnie since the early 80s to present, I have watched her at this age come into just totally out front about consciousness and change and trauma and repatterning. She's what was previously sort of in the shadows of the work that I think it has really come full front as she comes into this part of her life. Yes, the opportunity for change. We can change ourselves. I mean, what was her most recent series, I think online was, perhaps you were there. It was, just put the book down. Do you remember? I'm holding the book. and now I'm going to put the book down, or the rock. And first it was confusing. I could follow because I've been with her a long time, but I thought, what are other people thinking that are new to this work? She's just holding a book and then talking about putting it down. But then in that was like so profound. I mean, so profound. She was offering us here this choice. We have the choice.
Mm-hmm.
Recognize it.
Yeah. It's something very like a Zen master, a riddles.
Yes. And that she still opens the door for us to walk through to hear it.
Right.
What is her mission in life? I mean, her mission, like, I just look at this long trajectory of, she just keeps offering us the opportunity, and her language gets more simple, clearer, the examples clearer. So it's like, what, you know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, we're there. We'll join you, right?
Mm-hmm. So you, as an experienced teacher and a practitioner of the material, would you say there's I wouldn't say danger, but maybe like our body's extremely complex. And if we go into anatomy, we can find gazillion of little details and names inside of us. And somehow, sometimes I have a feeling that some people, by focusing too much on the anatomical details and the names, they kind of like miss out on the simplicity of the knowledge. What is your perspective on diving into such anatomical detail versus keeping the simplicity of, just being, amazed by, the wonder of our hand?
Well, this is a good question. I'm just pausing. I recently started using a phrase with my own students. And this was it, something like this. When we explore the templates of movement, so movement creates form. This is a Bonnie's statement.
Mm.
Movement creates the form. Okay. The movement's creating the form, and the movement is creating the anatomy. So when we study, the BMPs, the reflexes, when we go back to the developmental movements, the preverts, what I referred to even earlier, coming into form from formlessness, and how we hold a resonance as we come into form that we hold. These are foundational, what I call foundational movement templates that build the form. So one of the first ones we have is cellular breathing. And then from cellular breathing, we go to autonomic rhythm. And then autonomic rhythm, we have simultaneous condensing, expanding, yield, and on and on and on. These are templates. We could call them mandalas of movement that are creating our form through the embryological process. What would they all say, these movement forms? Expand, condense, three-dimensional, like simultaneous, into individuation of parts. And every body system is building upon that movement into form.
Mm-hmm.
So I just gave a big answer for your question. And that is, it's the movement. When we start to study these movement templates, then we begin to understand anatomy. They form the anatomy versus focusing on the detailed specificity of anatomy. And this creates our form. And then it gets so specified here, this little thing, and do you know the name, and do you know the location, and do you know what it does, and can we wiggle it, and et cetera, that we have lost the template that created it. You see, they go together. And so we must keep the perspective of how that anatomical, localized thing came into form in relationship to everything simultaneously. So it's the micro or the macro, and the beautifulness of teaching BMC is that you can do that. You can pull into localized, you can pull out to global, but it's the perspective of how we created ourselves. So it's wonderful if you want to go to that localized anatomical precision, but the ability not to lose yourself there.
Right.
But come out to the big picture, I think, is extremely important as part of the pedagogy of body mind centering. It's the embodiment process, not knowing every anatomical name and location and etc. That's a very different mind.
Right. Beautiful answer.
You know, I am very close to my body mind centering teachers. It is a different generation. These are the teachers that came out of the 70s. And we still talk a lot about body mind centering. You know, we talk about what it was like in the 70s and the early 80s, and then how it came through the 80s into the 90s and where it's going now. And the one thing that they always talk about is the work was based on embodiment.
Right.
Not anatomical details or precision. And that is what they have watched over time change. In a way, the emphasis on the embodiment was disappearing. But I think that is really changing. I'm really seeing it change. I know in the Taiwan program, where I'm a co-director, we are really committed to that balance. We teach the systems in the embodied anatomy, that it's always put in the context of the larger picture.
I would like to continue with this Taiwan program. A lot of things interest me here, but one of my greatest interests is always language and translating. So I would just like you to share your experience of coming into Taiwan and teaching, bringing this new material there, and how do you teach it to a different language and a different culture? Yeah. And also, what was your relationship with the translators? We can start here.
Well, first, the relationship with the translators. We are really lucky in the Taiwan program. We have 2 translators that are Feldenkrais practitioners in their own professional lives in Taipei. And so they have a movement anatomical based language already. So the translation from Chinese, Mandarin, or we could say it is Chinese, but it's a Taiwan version of Chinese, slightly different.
Right.
Of course, they're challenged by some of the vocabulary we use at BMC and concepts, right? And we spend a lot of time in preparation, pre-course, giving them lists of new vocabulary they will find in the course, lists of concepts, and we spend time together really finding the words. Now, here's the thing. That is embodied mind centering in English. when you go to translate into Chinese, the concept doesn't exist.
Right.
So we might say something simple in English like mind of the room. But to translate it in Chinese, that might take 5 minutes. So pre-courses, we spend a lot of time, like I said, with our translators, discussing concepts, finding the best way to say it, finding the best words, and they're so devoted to it. And I must mention Mei Chu, who is the administrative director of the program in Taiwan, and she works tirelessly at the translation, how to translate this work from an English-based language and a Western perspective to a Taiwanese, Asian, North Asian perspective. We have a third translator who is based in gyrotonics and somatics. So I need to mention her also. She works very hard at this. So we feel very lucky to have them. Translation. It's an art. And I find in the classroom, there are moments where I'm teaching in English and it's simultaneously translated into Chinese. And then I realize, oops, something's going on. You feel that thing go on in the room. And I look and you'll see it out in
Confusion
the room with
rippling.
the students, like a popcorn, pop, 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 pop. And they're looking at their phones and they're like, blah, blah, blah. They're talking. And I'm realizing I have to stop because we don't have agreement on the translation.
Right.
So you have to be willing to stop and to let the room come to conclusion on what is the word or what are we trying to say.
Mhm.
And that's very much a part of what happens in Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
And this, I love this process because I feel like it's taking body mind centering, what we accept in English, and it's really changing it into a new cultural framework,
Right.
a new language framework.
Right.
And thus it's changing the work and moving it forward into another culture.
Right.
And so as a teacher and as a director, that's being in the present moment to recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
This is happening and part of our process here.
Yeah. A beautiful, beautiful process. And a demanding one. But it's amazing how the language and the culture and the worldview, and by that, a relationship and perception of the body are connected, and how they
Yes.
change throughout the world. What would you say was the specific of the Taiwan culture that you haven't noticed in the Western culture related to the worldview and the perception of the body?
There's a lot of things.
Mm.
Let me start by saying one thing. I'm very aware in my role in Taiwan that I am a white Western woman
Mm-hmm.
who has learned body centering from a white Western teacher in English. So I want to make sure that I'm not coming to Taiwan to impose anything on top of them or their culture.
Mm.
That's the very, very first thing. I'm there to share the transmission of the work, right?
Right.
So that allows the culture, I believe, the people in the room to make it theirs,
Right.
and to sort of massage that in the process
Mm.
and watch it change through their history and their culture. So when you're working in a room with that many bodies, let's not even talk about language now. Let's just talk about the language of a body.
Mm-hmm.
And They were all carrying the history of their culture. So they comes into the room.
Mm.
And in body mind centering, there's space for process, space when we learn, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the things I've watched in the Taiwan program is introducing this space, unplanned space and time for integration and process. That was a very new concept to the way they've learned in their learning situations, in their institutions. They are on, they are motoring.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They are busy studying, working, showing up, and it's very linear.
Mm-hmm.
And they're strong in their minds and their thinking. And I have to tell them, tomorrow is a day off, and I want you not to study. I want you to go to the park or ride your bicycle or go to the beach or go meet a friend at a cafe, because they will spend the days off forming work groups to study everything we had done.
Mm-hmm.
So this is incredible. I've never worked with a group of people who are so serious in their studying, their memorization, their understanding. They show up for class on time. They are absolutely prepared. You know, they're hungry. But this is all wonderful, right? But
Mm-hmm.
what we've had to introduce little by little is space.
Right.
Something happens when you go walk out in the garden.
Yeah.
Something happens when you ride your bicycle and get out of the classroom. That is part of our process.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a good example? Is that an example you can get your head around?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course.
Yes,
Of course.
they are serious. And also, I would say in their culture, teachers are revered,
Uh-huh.
revered. So that was another thing, is in that revering, we had to make it safe for them to ask questions, to
Mm-hmm.
look like, I don't know what I'm doing, or what are we doing, or I don't feel anything, or what are you talking about? Like, they had full permission to question us as, quote, the teacher authority, which in their culture they would never, ever, ever do.
Right, 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 right.
So these are the things that are in the shadows of the classroom and the training that are cultural, that we bring in this other way of repatterning, actually, repatterning ways of how we have learned previously to how we learn inside the BMC classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. And it brings me to one of your quotes I read on Facebook. You actually left it as a comment on one of your posts, and it says, when we discover new ways to experience and inhabit ourselves, we create new choices, which is a deeply liberating process. Yeah, and that really resonated with me because it's kind of like the essence. Yeah,
That's it. Moksha, liberation. It's
yeah,
liberating. Yes, our mind just forms our own constructs.
yeah,
We create our own suffering, you know.
right.
Then when we're able to inhabit ourselves differently, it's not that anything goes away. It's just a door opens for us to reframe who we are or how we perceive the world.
Yes.
Yes.
And,
So Taiwan is such a beautiful culture, beautiful culture. And we also have students there from Japan and South Korea.
mhm.
Um, And that is a mix of cultures
Of course.
with a history between them, actually.
Yeah.
Um, So it's really beautiful to see old constructs come down and new connections be made in present time.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah, and being aware and honoring the differences,
Oh,
but yet this aspect of universality opens up. Like, yes, we are different and we have our histories, but none of it is not too rigid. It's all in a way fluid, and beneath all that there is universality. There is something that we all share as human beings with bodies.
there's a way we connect, that through time and space, there's a connection.
Yeah.
Is it the stories or is it that? Like we get down to the bare basics of connection,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Yes, I think so. Mhm. So every time I go to Taiwan, that's the spirit that I try to hold for all of us, our faculty and the students. And um, well, yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I also saw one of your sentences when you said that you are holding that perspective every time you teach and touch somebody,
Yes.
being aware of this vibration pulsation that we were talking in the beginning, that which transcends, which is underneath everything.
That's the great repatterning.
Mm,
Like, I love this word, repatterning.
yeah.
Repattern. We have a pattern, and then we introduce some new information, and the pattern then has to let go and reform or
Mhm,
hold on, but new information can come in and create a new pattern.
mhm.
Isn't that the most wonderful concept? I
Yeah, it's
mean,
amazing.
yeah, you put your hands on someone and then you're introducing something, and they might not know what it is, but they can feel that, well, that's different.
Yeah.
That's different. Okay. So like, their curiosity is what will lead them to be possibly follow through on the repatterning.
Mhm.
Mm.
And I love this term, the Great Repatterning. Kind of like the Great Depression, but it's the Great Repatterning.
I'm going to write that down, the great repatterning.
It's a
You could just
movement.
have these spontaneous repatternings everywhere, right? Just with the mind of the room, you just watch it. Emily Conrad said the most beautiful statement once. She said something like this. She said, without context, it's madness.
Mm,
And she'd say it all the time. And I think at first time I heard it, I thought, what? Without context, it's madness. And then I realized it's right. If we don't contextualize what we are doing,
right.
what this body of work is, how this body of work will continue to grow and develop, and how it's useful, it's a process of contextualizing also.
Mm,
Then it does seem like a sort of madness, right?
right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons I am doing this project in a way, to give space to all these beautiful people who have dedicated their lives to it, to give their own context and their own richness.
I think it's wonderful what you're doing. Thank you for contributing your time and, pulling these interviews together. It's so important.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, yes. It's a pleasure to meet you and talk with you. I feel like we could talk about many things.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. Thank you for your time and for your voice and everything behind it.
Mhm. It's lovely to be witnessed. Thank you.